Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a well-known and respected expert from the world of money from Seattle, USA, Mr. John Martinka. John, welcome to the show.
I'm pleased to be here.
Thank you. John is a deal maker with Nokomis Advisory Services. He's known as the escape artist and is an author of a book titled Exit with Style, Grace, and More Money. So, John, before we start talking about Nokomis and all the amazing work you're doing, tell me about your own journey and what inspired you to call yourself the escape artist.
Okay, so the journey is like a lot of people. It meandered all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
My mother wanted me to be an accountant, and I took enough accounting classes to almost have a minor, and said, "No, this isn't me."
Mm-hmm.
And got out of school, and where I grew up in the Midwest, not too far from where you are now visiting your son.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for the local concert promoter for about 5 years, and then my wife and I said, we've lived here a long time. We want to live somewhere else. We ended up outside of Seattle, and we've been here ever since. Did some sales things, and was encouraged by both a manager at the time and our veterinarian, the wide-ranging reach, to join Rotary and give back to the community. And there I ended up a few years later being president, and the gentleman who was president before me, one day, a couple of years later, said something along the lines of that he always thought I'd be good in this business and helping people buy and sell companies.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great fit for me. I don't have the engineer's brain that can concentrate on the same project day in and day out.
Mm-hmm.
So the variety of marketing and analysis and negotiation and sales, all those things, makes for a good day, week, month, whatever.
Amazing. And what was the first business you helped someone buy or sell? And what did you learn from that experience?
I don't know if I really can't. It's been since the 1990s, so I can't remember exactly.
No, that's okay.
First one, but I'll tell you the one that always stands out, and it's the opening of one of my other books, and it's about a client named George, and the book starts out, and I don't know if I'm going to quote it exactly, but it said, when I told George nobody will buy your business, the line was he deflated like a pin in a balloon, sends it swirling around the room. He just and George had a nice business when George paid attention to the business.
Mm-hmm.
But George also liked to train horses.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the business was going up, he'd train horses. Then the business go down, he'd come back to the business. Well, I figured out pretty quickly that, it was a revenue problem. We started around this time of year, this summer. By the end, put in a new marketing and sales plan. By the end of the year, he was 33% above budget.
Mm-hmm.
The next summer, he got 2 offers from industry buyers, and he turned them down. And fast forward 5 years, and one of those buyers came back and gave him significantly more money for the company. By
Amazing.
doing the things that, the book you mentioned, it's Exit with Style, Grace, and More Money, goes through, that makes a business attractive to buyers. Because, when you own a business, and you've owned businesses, you have options. At some point, something's going to happen. The business is going to close. You're going to hand it off to family or management, or you're going to sell it for a variety of reasons. Internal sale, external employee stock ownership plan, etc. Something will happen to it. And if you're ready for that, you're going to have a better business along the way also.
I see. So now tell me a little bit about Nokomis Advisory Services, and how has working alongside your daughter shaped your business philosophy?
It's been interesting. My daughter joined me about 7 years ago. She did not have a true business background. She had done some project management and some grant writing and administration, and so she's been a sponge for knowledge. So it's been good to really see her grow
Mhm.
as a business person. Uh, it what has it taught me? I mean, it has really taught me it is easier to say than do to delegate,
Mm.
and have to let her, spread her wings and say, you do this. You don't need me to look at that.
Correct.
It's a tough one.
Yep, yep, yep. And that's such a powerful lesson, John, because delegation and giving up is a really difficult thing for anyone in the world. But let's now talk about the work that you're doing at Nokomis. What does exiting with style, grace, and more money mean to you and to your clients?
Well, the money part is easy.
Absolutely, I agree.
Okay.
Hmm.
To me, to us, exiting with style and grace means you have found the right buyer. You
Hmm.
weren't desperate for a buyer. And
Hmm.
that right buyer is one is continue what the seller has done, improve upon it, grow
Hmm.
it, keep the legacy, take care of the employees. If there's a note to the seller, make those payments, all of that.
Hmm. And based on all the work that you've done advising so many businesses, what, in your view, are some of the common mistakes a lot of small business owners make when they're trying to sell?
Well, first, we're talking about operating businesses. We're not
Yeah,
talking about an advisory business
I
or
agree.
a sole practitioner attorney or
Hmm.
something like that.
Hmm.
Your podcast is the brand called you.
Yeah.
If you have an operating business,
Mhm.
that's the biggest mistake is to have the brand be you, the owner.
Hmm.
You want there to be company goodwill, not personal goodwill.
Correct.
And if you as the owner, Tusha, if you are the only one who has the key customer relationships or the only one who can do complicated bids and set, you have a lot less to sell of a
Hmm.
team doing that.
Hmm. Interesting.
So,
And why do you believe most business owners underestimate how hard it is to sell their business? I've met so many people around the world where they say that, we want to sell, but we can't find the right buyer.
yeah, well, let's start with some basics. When I got into this business, uh, some of the statistics I heard include 90% of individuals who want to buy a business. We're not talking private equity.
Yeah.
We're not talking companies buying another one. 90% of individuals, which is where bottom up in the market, a qualified individual buys a business, takes it to the next level.
Hmm.
The 90% never buy.
Hmm.
They just want to talk about it. So the market is flooded with tire kickers, and that scares sellers because there's a lot of unqualified buyers who are just going through the motions.
Hmm.
Other statistics I heard was that 80% of businesses are not worth buying, which
Hmm.
means they don't make enough profit to pay for the business and have it be thrive uh, after paying a fair market owner salary. And I
Hmm.
can't argue with that because the other things I've heard, someone the other day said, well, I've heard 80% of companies don't sell, and I've
Hmm.
heard 90% don't sell. And my answer to that is you're probably right, but I'll tell you 90 or more percent of good businesses do sell.
Hmm.
And it, and it there are a number of factors. And when I would speak to audiences, I would ask, what are the top three things to getting a deal done, a buy sell deal? And I don't care if it's,
Hmm.
a $1 million deal, $20 million deal, $40 million deal. We're not talking big corporate things. And the answers are always, well, price and the amount of cash and things like that. And I say, yes, those are important, but first of all, you have to have a motivated buyer and a motivated seller.
Hmm.
That seller can't be motivated just to get more money.
Hmm.
Second, they have to there has to be a relationship. That relationship better be solid because
Hmm.
I'm in the lower middle market, and even if you get to larger companies, there's a big concern again for that the right buyer to
Hmm.
keep it going. And
Correct.
then third is education.
Hmm.
That there are valuation ranges. Your business is not so special
Hmm.
that you're going to be way out of the norm, or You will get frustrated along the way. There will be ups and downs and ups and
Mm,
downs, and you'll go, and every buyer and every seller in a deal both think I've given more than I've got.
mm.
And when that happens, they're equally unhappy and happy. A deal happens.
Very well said. And when I was preparing for my conversation with you and reading about you, I was fascinated to find a statement that selling a business is different from selling a house. Why is this a dangerous analogy?
Well, at least in the U.S. and in the U.S. we have what's called the multiple listing service,
Mhm.
and almost every house for sale goes on it. It's public. It's out there. There's a sign out front, and I can give you an example. In a place we walk our dogs is we go house. They were selling it, and what do we see out there? Landscaping, painting, cleaning, a plumber, all that. And now it looks completely different. And again,
Mm,
there's a sign out front. They put in flowers along the walkway. It looks so much different.
mm.
And with the business, first of all, we'll take away that grooming part.
Yeah.
With the business, you don't want it on the multiple listing service. You're an operating business. You're selling
Mm,
to, probably especially B2B, but even B2C. You don't
mm,
want customers to know. You're scared that employees are going to find yours for sale and freak out and go look for jobs.
mm,
You're worried suppliers. I remember an owner telling me, "Yeah, I told my number one supplier I was thinking of selling, and they put me on COD."
mm.
So all those things make,
Yeah.
confidentiality key, and the scariest thing to an owner thinking of selling is breach of confidentiality.
Very interesting. You also say your people are your number one value driver. Tell me more about this.
Well, your people I can't claim I came up with this next line. It's an accountant I know, and she said, "Your people are number one asset, and they're not on the balance sheet."
Mm,
And pe people are a business's top asset.
correct.
Once you get to beyond where the owner is the business,
Mm,
and yes, you can have a product that is everything, but who made that product? Who designed it? You look at Apple, look at Microsoft. They have great products, but they have
mm,
hundreds of thousands of people working on every product. So
mm,
it is, and I'm going to give you a story that there's a meeting between a buyer and the seller
mm,
was being rather stubborn on not letting the buyer talk to the management people before the deal closed, which would be absolute last thing before closing. I want to make
mm,
sure we get along, they're okay. And the buyer just sat there and he just like, I'm going to do, he looked him in the eye, very serious, and said, "You may think I'm buying your business. I'm really
mm,
buying your people."
mm,
He got to talk to him, did the deal, grew the business, did well.
mm. Fascinating. What are the top three things that buyers should look for in a management team?
In a management team, well, uh, it's being accepting delegation. We
Mhm.
talked about the owner has to delegate, but accepting delegation uh, is one. The I Wanting to have career advancement and looking for opportunities within the company. So if the owner doesn't offer them that, if they're good, they're going to leave. And the other thing is to be honest, open, and not take being a boss too seriously. You can't, you know, every business publication, whether it's online, a magazine, the Wall Street Journal, it they always seem to have articles on bad bosses.
Mm,
What could bosses do better,
correct.
et cetera, et cetera. Don't be
Mm,
that person.
correct.
Be a
Correct.
team builder.
Yeah. Yeah. And what, in your view, is the role of an emotional attachment to business that could hinder an exit decision? And how can owners overcome this?
Well, most people listening to this have probably heard the expression: the small business, the mid-sized
Mm,
business is the owner's
mm,
baby. And it truly is, and they can get exit anxiety,
Hmm.
and so they have to be ready. So in our book, Exit with Style, Grace, and More Money, the first chapter is devoted primarily to the person, the
Hmm.
owner, the seller, and it's questions to right away that I would ask an owner: have you talked to your financial advisor? If you can get, whether it's $1 or $20 million, is it enough for what you want to do? We call it your next great adventure at life. Could be another business, could be charitable work, could be retirement, whatever it is. And then it's, do you know what you're going to do?
Hmm.
And if what you if what you're going to do is retirement, does your spouse want you around 24/7?
Hmm.
So if they haven't thought about what they want to do,
Hmm.
that's where you can get seller remorse.
Hmm.
A couple years ago, we were working with on a deal, and the the seller said he had talked to his financial advisor. Everything was good. If he got X dollars, then near the end of the process, he said, "That's not enough. My advisor
Hmm.
says I need more." What a
Hmm.
mess. Be ready.
Hmm.
That's the number one thing. Be ready financially and emotionally and family wise.
Hmm. Fascinating. What dangers lie in assuming a family member or an employee when a business is taken over?
Could you say the first part again? It broke up a
What
little.
what dangers lie in
Oh,
assuming a family member or employee will automatically take over the business?
yeah, that's a good one because uh, there are times where especially family members more than management think they're entitled, and
Correct.
that often doesn't work. And I'm going to give you an example of
Mm,
how it was done exactly the right way.
mhm,
I'm going to preface it with a group I'm in here in Seattle. We had a meeting and a speaker, second generation. She's taken over for her dad's business, but she only owns 10%, I think.
mhm,
And she's going to be buying the rest. So it's not like, here's the business, it's yours, because it's still a big part of dad
mm,
and mom's retirement. But I'm going to go back to Dick and Kathy, and I did some work with them a while back, quite a while back. And they had a nice business. Dick had bought it. Kathy was a CFO in a tech company, and he bought it. Very cheap business. I mean, a few hundred thousand, and he was growing it nicely. And she was helping out on the accounting side. And they had a son, and they hired their son to be a salesperson.
mm,
And maybe not literally knocking on doors, but knocking on doors, making phone calls,
mm,
etc. And he was a he proved to be a good salesperson.
mm,
And as they grew, they had more salespeople. They made him sales manager, and he did a really good job as sales manager.
mhm,
Then they made him company president, and they gave 10% of their shares.
mm,
When it came for time for them to exit, the plan we put in place was, because they had so much faith in him,
mhm,
was they took I believe it was a 20-year payment, an annuity for the other 90% at fair
mm,
market value. And dad stayed on as chairman of the board, and mom was helping on the accounting side, given she was a CFO, as they phased themselves out.
mm.
He had to earn it. It wasn't given to him. There's an expression, the first generation creates it, the second generation grows it, the third generation destroys it.
Correct.
And it's not always true. I have a friend who's in his he's the third generation, he's growing it phenomenally.
Mm,
But that when it's given to you, not sold, that's where the real issues come.
mm. Well said. Well said. And my next question, John, for you is how do you ensure that valuations are fair and that you prevent negotiations from falling apart?
Well, it goes back to what I said about clients, or buyers and sellers both being educated on what it's going to sell for.
Mm,
So there are ranges for different size businesses. If you're selling a business making $1 million a year,
mm,
and all other things being equal, you're going to get a lower multiple of earnings than someone selling a business, similar business, with $3 million of earnings
Hmm.
because there's less risk because you have more income, you have more employees,
Right.
but then I say all things being equal, no customer concentration,
Hmm.
no dominant supplier, uh, there's no owner dependency. And another big one is uh, there are accurate financial statements that the owners aren't blending personal expenses in, that they keep, it's just good accounting. So, those are the things that come in,
Hmm.
and when you understand where in that range, and then you've narrowed the field for negotiation. If you're negotiating a wide open versus narrow, uh,
Hmm.
it's a lot harder when it's very wide open. But we're in agreement. Yes, this is
Hmm.
worth between 4.5 and 5 times, or 5.5 to 6 times earnings. You're starting out a lot closer, and then it's the business. Almost every deal the business has to pay for itself.
Hmm.
I was in a room with a client last fall,
Yeah.
and the private equity firm was there. It was a roll up in this industry, and our client, even though we had told him, the attorney told him, the accountant told him, the working capital is going to stay in the business. He was going, I don't want that's my money. I don't want the working capital in the business.
Hmm.
And the CEO of the buying company
Yeah.
just said, I am not going to buy a business and go cash negative the first month.
Correct. Correct. I have time for
So
two more questions for you, John.
yeah.
What advice would you have for someone looking to buy a business instead of starting one? It's the classical build versus buy uh, challenge that every businessman faces.
What we find with, okay, we're going to work up in the market.
Yeah.
We find if it's an individual buyer, they are not a creator.
Hmm.
They don't have that idea. They're not, that entrepreneurial idea that says this is going to be the next greatest thing. So buying a business, mature, profitable, fairly priced business makes a lot more sense.
Hmm.
And we see a lot. There are people going to start a business because I have a good friend who said he wanted to buy a business 20 years ago. He couldn't buy one. Well, he could buy one. He was just too fussy.
Hmm.
He
Hmm.
started one and has been very successful at it,
Yeah.
but it started something in his passion. But for most people, if they don't have that idea, buying one and using the skills they've built up in say the corporate world,
Hmm.
managing people, processes, money, etc.,
Hmm.
is the way to go. When you go up, if you get a small business into the private equity, uh, you're a small business, and I say small business, they could be doing 10, 20 million in sales, making good money. And they say, we want to be in a different city. We want a different product line. It is so much easier to buy one
Correct.
to do that than to
Correct.
distract all your people to start one when they've never started one
Hmm.
forever, or maybe since you started it. And so that's really the big reason. And of course your private equity, family offices, larger firms, they're not going to mess with that. They want to buy.
Amazing. What a great response. And my last question for you, can you share a story where a client exited from their businesses with true style, grace, and more money?
Well, there's many to choose from. Uh, Trying to think of, let me think of a really good one. Uh, I told you the story about George when he got a
Yeah.
lot more money 5 years later, went
Hmm.
off to do his passion in life. He wasn't ready to retire. Um, I'm gonna, memories are short, so I'm gonna go with something more recent.
Hmm.
And this is a second generation owner of a
Hmm.
business. He sold it last year, sold it to someone in the industry.
Hmm.
They really wanted it,
Hmm.
really wanted it.
Hmm.
I told them I said, the market for your business, if you are in the open market, you would probably get about 10 million.
Hmm.
They offered a little over 12.
Hmm.
They ended up at 15.2
Hmm.
because it was such a motivated seller. To them,
Wow.
this was a missing piece in the
Hmm.
puzzle. Two plus
Hmm.
two equals 22. He was able to, he wasn't let's put it this way. He was at the age a lot of people would say his retirement age, but the guy had so much
Mm,
energy, it was
mm,
unbelievable. So he took his chips off the table and stayed on to run the division. And, so he exited his way.
wow.
He was one
Wow.
of those guys that, if he sold and was just hanging around the house all the time, his wife would go crazy.
Mm. And what a
And
great story on this one. But on that note, John, I just want to say what a fascinating and knowledge filled conversation this has been. Thank you for speaking to me about so many different aspects of what goes into selling a business, and my viewers and listeners will gain a lot of insights into what goes into not just building businesses, but exiting with style, grace, and more money. Thank you so much for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
yeah, thank you for having me. This was a great conversation,
Thank
and
you.
I know it will benefit your listeners.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.